Good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar on exploring temporary labour, which can be procured through the HR Services and Solutions Framework 569 under Lot 1. My name is Lizzie Grayson and I'm a category buyer at YPO. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've all joined this webinar in listen mode only. You'll have the opportunity, though, to submit any text questions to me by using the question panel along the control panel on your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and if there's enough time left at the end, I will try to answer as many as possible. But if not, I will create a document that I will distribute to anybody at the end of the webinar. So what can you expect to learn from today's webinar? So what I'm going to start by doing is doing an explanation of the traditional temporary labour delivery models, then look at how we can do the creating and scoping of the specification, look at key areas to consider then when procuring your temporary labour, a little look at structuring your tender documents, a few references to other authorities' experience, and then a quick guide on how to buy from the framework. So I'm going to start by looking at the three traditional models of service delivery within the temporary labour sector. Temporary labour is delivered through a managed service provider, alternatively known as an MSP. And about 3 years ago, these were primarily divided into two areas. One, the neutral vendor MSP, and two, the master vendor MSP. Over the last few years, though, we've started to see a shift towards something called the hybrid model. It's now being delivered across several organisations, so let's have a little look at the different models in a little more detail. So, a neutral vendor MSP manages all requests for a temporary worker and fills the roles through a range of specialist recruitment agencies. It is the provider's responsibility to manage the agencies that deliver the worker and monitor them to ensure effective cost and quality of service. The supply chain of the recruitment agencies support the delivery of the service and you have full transparency and are easily accessible to the contracting authority. So in the recent times we've seen a shift where neutral vendor providers will also allow access and talk to your supply chain when it's relevant and appropriate to do so. The provider will also ensure that agencies have carried out all the relevant vetting checks and have agreed pre-agreed rates for the different categories of workers. Generally, the provider will also have an ICT platform where you'll be able to manage and order all your workers and is accessible for the authority and recruitment agencies. Typical providers that deliver neutral vendor models are Commensura, Matrix and Pool. So now let's have a quick look at the master vendor model. So master vendor MSP manages all requests for temporary workers again, but the key difference here is that a master vendor is actually a recruitment agency in their own right. The master vendor will fill roles either through their own office branches or for situations where the provider feels it is more appropriate, they will utilise a supply chain of recruitment agencies again. It's all about what meets your needs. It's the provider's responsibility once again to manage the agencies that deliver the worker and monitor them to ensure effective cost and quality of service. All workers, whether they're delivered through the supply chain or the internal branches, will be transparent to the contracting authority. The provider will ensure that the branch or the supply chain agency carries out all the pre-vetting checks, so you don't have to. The rates are also agreed with each of the branches or the external recruitment agencies. The types of suppliers that deliver a master vendor are Adecco, Hayes, Pertemps, Reed, Randstad, Retinue and Swanstaff. As you will notice, these are more the recruitment agencies you'll see on the high street. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the hybrid model because we're starting to see quite a shift in the market on how people are wanting to buy these services. So the hybrid model started to be spoken about a few years ago. when the authorities highlighted that even though the delivery models of master and neutral had worked really, really well and helped to pull together all their temporary labour spend under control, it didn't necessarily always manage spend categories perfectly, and they believed that authorities and providers could make this work much better. The key areas that authorities wanted to develop with providers were how could they possibly start to look at how high-level paid workers, such as interims, could be managed through the contract effectively, the appropriate contact when required with the supply chain. This might be relevant for social care and emergency cases. And also, some categories of spend appear to just be getting better delivered through a neutral vendor or a master vendor. So what we've seen in the past years is that authorities that have had a neutral vendor solution have then moved across to a master vendor solution, and there's always in both areas been categories that haven't always been successful or as successful as others. So what the hybrid does is gives you that flexibility and brings the two together. The hybrid model is about creating something a bit more bespoke to your authority by understanding the categories of spend and utilising the most appropriate way to supply a worker successfully and additional support services. Depending on the market conditions, the provider will then either deliver each category of worker through a neutral vendor way or a master vendor way. So just to give you a bit of feedback in what we're starting to see in the market. So in general, what we've seen is that the traditional managed vendor providers will understand the categories of workers and then deliver each category either in a master vendor method or a neutral vendor method. So then the question is, how can a neutral vendor, the old traditional neutral vendor provider, deliver these services? Because they're not a recruitment agency themselves. So how can they deliver some of the categories through a master vendor model? But what we've seen in the market is that these traditional neutral vendor providers will deliver some categories of spend in the normal neutral vendor way, but then what they will also do is areas where they feel like it's more high touch and needs more of a master vendor and in-depth approach, they will deliver these through lead recruitment agencies. This is relevant in areas such as social care. We're starting to see that the hybrid model is being delivered differently across different providers, so I'd always advise that before looking at the hybrid model, you have to take the time to understand what it means to each provider. If I'm honest, it's not being defined exactly what it means. All providers will explain it in a different way and deliver it in a different method. So it's really important that you give them the opportunity to explain what it means to them. As in previous models, all the same responsibility of managing the agencies and the workers, monitoring the effective cost and quality is all relevant as well in the hybrid model. All workers, again, will be completely transparent to all contracting authorities. The providers, again, will ensure that either the branch or supply chain agency carries out the appropriate pre-vetting checks and also has the pre-agreed rates through either branches or agencies. When speaking to a high volume of providers, it's likely that quite a lot of the traditional master vendor and neutral vendor models have evolved over time to what is in effect a hybrid model. So even though it's not being officially classified by either you or the provider, a lot of the feedback that we're getting is actually we've probably started to evolve into a hybrid model already for a lot of our customers. We just haven't committed and called it a hybrid. So it's quite interesting when people are looking at specifying their services and to actually how many of them are probably starting to already have a hybrid model in there in place. So just so you know, to be honest, we're seeing that most providers in the market can now deliver a hybrid model. So all the ones that delivered a neutral and master previously can also deliver a hybrid model. So what I wanted to highlight and discuss with you now is some work we've kind of been doing over the last few months to a year, is around actually why not actually do an outcome-based specification when buying these services. So for many years, the market has always been very, very driven by prescribing a specific model. However, if I'm honest, and maybe I was being a little bit naive, when I first started working in procurement, procuring these services, I couldn't understand why we couldn't specify what we needed to the market and then help them allow us to support in shaping the most appropriate model for us. I kept going into different councils and different kinds of organisations, and everyone was saying this little bit doesn't work or this little bit doesn't work. And I feel like if actually we could look at actually what do we want to achieve by delivering this service and creating more outcome-based specifications, it could actually generate more of a bespoke solution for yourself. It is recognised that we're all in different geographical areas, so each of you will have unique challenges when recruiting workers. So each model needs to be unique for you. So I've been doing quite a bit of work with both different authorities and the supply market to understand how by creating these outcome-based specifications can support both organisations. Because I think one of the challenges we thought we'd come against is that the supply market wasn't too sure how they would actually specify that or create a solution for that. But actually the supply market reacts better than anything. It's about giving them the opportunity to understand you and letting them help your organisation achieve the aims that you need to achieve. An outcome-based specification allows you to create a bespoke model that might actually not be called anything. So we've had a lot of conversations where people are still wanting to say, well, what do I call it? And actually, you don't have to call it anything. You can just tell a supplier what you want in this market, how you want them to deliver you a temporary labour market. So sometimes it's a matter of getting a blank piece of paper, writing down your requirements, and actually saying, this is what I want from an MSP within temporary labour. We've had some great feedback, as I've mentioned, from both providers and contracting authorities when procuring in this way. It allows the providers to be innovative and to understand you. And that's what we really want when doing a tender, isn't it? So what I thought I'd go over now is actually, so it's a few areas to think about. So I thought I'd start by actually asking quite a simple question, but it's also one that I find a lot of organisations and me when looking at organisations when they're wanting my guidance is quite difficult, is actually what do we want from a temporary labour contract? And it might be that you want someone to just carry out the pre-vetting and send a worker in with no additional support or management. However, it could be the complete other end of the spectrum where you require a provider to do all of the basics of providing that worker, but you also then want them to understand you and work with you to understand how your temporary recruitment links into your permanent recruitment campaigns. How can you look at your social value strategy and unemployment and apprenticeship schemes? How does all that have an impact on this contract? And the providers will tell you it does, but generally they aren't aware as much of this, so they want to be aware of it. So I think what the answer is that actually a managed service within this market can do as little or as much as you want it to be. It does all just depend on what you actually want from that contract. Allowing the provider to understand what you want allows the provider to be most bespoke to you, and that's what we want in the end. So a few areas that I thought I'd kind of just play with to kind of give you an idea of what to look at and start questioning. So obviously the first one to actually think about when procuring these services, or actually just reviewing your current contract, is the model working that you've currently got in place? And do you want to specify a model? Or actually, do you like the idea of creating an outcome-driven specification and giving yourself that little bit more flexibility? So another thing is, how will this contract run in line with your permanent recruitment strategy? You need to ensure that your permanent and temporary labour strategies and contracts run in line. It allows the provider to understand what you need. So if you have got a drive, and we all have got a drive to get more permanent recruitment in social care, they want to be engaged in understanding that strategy, and your temporary recruitment model needs to make sure it runs in line with that strategy as well. Another area is, when do you actually need temporary workers? And we all know there's a right and a wrong time to have a temporary worker in place. And I think when you're renewing a contract or looking at going out to procure, it's a good time to actually look at the structure of the policies that you have in place that allow for hiring managers to understand what they should and shouldn't be doing when recruiting temporary workers. Or do they understand the impact of the fees, the management fees, the charges behind it for keeping that extra person on one more week, and making that analysis as whether that one more week is relevant or not. I think creating those policies and understanding those policies, we've seen some really good savings come out of actually making sure that those policies are tight. I think another thing is to actually look at the current workers that you've got in place at the minute. So the renewal of a contract can be a great opportunity to highlight some long-term temporary workers. So I've gone and reviewed some different authorities, and some people have been there years on a temporary contract. So I think it's understanding that, and why couldn't it be a permanent contract? Why couldn't we avoid those fees? Or actually, is there a reason why it's been on that long? And actually, it's more cost effective to have done it in that way. I suppose there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of understanding when's the right or wrong time to actually deliver a permanent or temporary worker. I also see that hiring managers are much more understanding when you're currently looking at reviewing your contract. So hiring managers, can have the opportunity to actually look in depth to say, why have we got this worker on for 3 years? Why is this one for 2 years? And hiring managers, with the work we've done with other people, they seem to be more receptive to the actual idea of that. Another thing to kind of look at is actually, what does your temporary worker contract actually mean around, do you want to evolve social value? Do you want to include the high-level interim workers? What do you want to fit into your contract? Do you want talent pool management in there? There's quite a lot of areas that might link into your temporary worker contract that could also be covered in the specification and also add quite a bit of value as well. The last thing I also wanted to mention is an important thing to do is to decide on your choice of service. It can be really beneficial to carry out some hiring managers surveys. It gives you the opportunity to understand what your hiring managers want and needs are. Another thing that we would also advise is, when you're looking at this market, is it's really good to carry out some supplier engagement providers on the framework. It gives you an opportunity to understand the market in more detail, and it gives the providers the opportunity to understand you as well, which can be the difficult bit for them sometimes when completing a tender. So I thought I'd give some pointers on what areas may be quite interesting to cover in the specification. So whether you're looking to do a direct award to one provider or carry out a further competition, it's still good to ensure that you have an understanding of your requirements. So I thought I'd go over some of the things I thought I'd suggest to cover in the specification. And I'm not going to go over every single one of these points, but if you want a one-on-one conversation, I'm more than happy to do that. But I thought I'd highlight some of the key ones. So one of the areas is, so what does actually social value mean to your organisation? And how will it impact the delivery of this contract? Do you want the successful provider to look at apprenticeship and graduate schemes instead of constantly placing temporary workers? How could the provider help you to support the unemployed in your area? Could this be classified by types of workers or different areas where the provider can actually help you in developing this? This contract has an impact across your whole organisation, and with social value being so key at the minute, we're seeing some really good examples in different councils around where social value can happen. So one authority at the minute actually has a social value champion in there. That social value champion for all temporary recruits, when that is pulled together, when they have that temporary worker in there, certain categories of spend, it doesn't go out to the market until that council is sure that it could not be delivered or recruited through an unemployed position. So they work with the local organisations to check this, which seems like a bit of work, but actually the charges and fees through the contract are not that much higher. So it's just something to think about. Another key thing is to actually, the key thing to do is, when understanding your current position, is to look at your hiring manager's current views and understand their future needs, because things are changing quite quickly. We've worked with several authorities that have published a quick questionnaire to their hiring managers to ask just this. The feedback from this questionnaire is being used in the specification to allow for providers to understand what's important to their key stakeholders. So the hiring manager survey can just be 3 or 4 questions around what's not working, what is working, what do you want for the future, how do you effectively think that you're going to be recruiting temporary workers in the future. We've got examples of these hiring managers questionnaires that I'm more than happy to distribute to any organisation that feels it's relevant. But it is really interesting because some organisations that have put it in the specification, it gives the providers something to see where they're going and to understand where you've been. Another area is we're starting to see an increase in the number of authorities that are classing temporary and interim recruitment as the same contracts. As I believe this is totally acceptable as long as it's also recognised by the contracting authority that there will be higher agency fees related to interim recruitment. This is due to the extra volume of work required when finding high-level staff. The management of interim recruitment can be managed through one MSP, but it should also be treated differently to everyday temporary labour. For example, there's likely to be a high level of engagement with hiring managers. So when a chief exec requires a director of social services, they are going to want that interaction. So that is going to cost more money on the management fees. So as long as that is understood and can be discussed with people, I think it's easily accessible that it will go through the contract. The key to pulling everything together in specification is also about fully understanding your authority's needs and writing this down to help providers understand you. I've covered some of the areas in more detail, but feel free to ask a question throughout the webinar or contact me directly to discuss any of the points in more detail. So I thought it'd be helpful to then also look at how we could potentially structure a specification, and this is by no means 100% structure, it's just a draft. So there's so much to think about when creating a specification. It can be difficult to start looking at how to pull it together. So firstly, have a go at actually telling the providers not about how everything's delivered at the minute, but actually where you're going in recruitment. So let them understand as much about your current position in relation to recruitment as possible. So what are your wider recruitment strategies as an organisation? What are your future plans? You can also attach them their relevant strategies to look at how you can pull this together. Once you've told the providers a little bit about where you're going within the recruitment market, I'd also then start to tell them about your current delivery model within temporary labour. This will allow them to understand the journey you have been on over the last few years. This may include feedback from the hiring manager's questionnaire, so it just gives them that idea of where your current position is. So if you're moving from a neutral model and you're going into a hybrid, it allows them to understand you a little bit more and make sure that their tender document is relevant. Also, depending on how you want to decide on your models, give the providers an understanding of the model or outcomes you wish to achieve. You can be as prescriptive or as not prescriptive as you like, but you do need to ensure that providers understand what you wish to achieve through the contract. So this is where you need to make a decision as to whether you want to be prescriptive about a neutral, a master or a hybrid model, or whether you want to be outcome-based. The providers will engage with you to understand what you need, and that's what's important. Even though YPO have created the generic specification, there might also be elements of this that you wish to be more specific about. So for example, a specific process in relation to the recruitment of social workers. You might want more interaction with these agencies. You might want to talk to the sanctuaries, the liquids of the world. So you might be more specific about these areas. You might just want to be able to engage with them and understand them a little bit more because it's one of your key areas of spend. And I suppose this is an opportunity where you can be a bit more specific. Even though we have covered the basics for you, you can talk and delve into the detail a lot more. Another area might be, and we've seen this has been missed in a few in the past, so a key area is actually what is your specific IT requirements. So actually telling the provider what they need to link in on your systems to ensure payments, etc. So that's just something that I would definitely advise to put in there. The next thing is to actually go on to then, is there any additional areas such as interim recruitment or talent pool management that you wish the provider to look at with you? So for example, if you're procuring your interim recruitment through the contract, I would 100% separate this out into its own section to help providers understand how you want this element of the work to be effectively managed, because it is so different. For example, it will be that those agencies want to have the conversations to find you the right candidates. You need to allow them to have find those right candidates for you. The rates are also likely going to be higher, as I previously mentioned. The next thing is to then look at the value-added areas that you feel an MSP can support you with. For example, how the contract will link into your social value strategy. It gives them a clear understanding of where you're going. This is by no means, as I mentioned, a final structure of your specification, but it just gives you a breakdown of the key areas to cover. I thought I'd go on to next some of the key areas to look into on the quality aspects. So if you're looking to do a further competition through any framework, here's some of the areas that I would look at understanding. But even if you're not doing a further competition and want to do a direct award, it's a good idea to actually have got the answers to these questions before you direct award as well. So understanding the delivery model the provider proposes and how will they deliver this model you require. It's a good idea then to support this with why the provider believes this model will deliver your outcomes. Whether you have or haven't specified it needs to deliver what you need to achieve. The next one is implementation of the service. As we all know, changing providers or even sticking with the same provider and refreshing the service can be timely. So you need to ensure that they know how they're going to manage the implementation of that service for you. The continuous management and improvement of the service. So we're seeing that the market is constantly changing in the HR world. So it's imperative that your provider helps support you with the development and innovation of such services in the future. You don't want a service that is just here in year one, but in 4 years' time it feels a little bit outdated. How will that provider constantly manage and improve and innovate with you? Another area to maybe question and look at is how will they actually manage the supply chains or manage their own branches as well, if it is going to be delivered internally. It's important when understanding this in the hybrid model, because you need to ensure that the right categories are delivered through the right routes to market. It needs to be the right thing for you, whether it's going to be a branch, a lead supplier, or a wider supply chain. One of the last areas that again I would mention is around actually the IT system capabilities. Generally we see that all providers across the sector have similar capabilities when ordering your temporary worker, but it's around that transition and support that they're going to give you and the MI and all that kind of area that we see that there's an added value and how they're then going to manage this. I hope that's been helpful to look at some of the aspects. This is again by no means the only areas I would cover, but it's just some of the key areas I would highlight. So I now thought it might be quite helpful to kind of look at how to create potentially your pricing matrix, as it can always be a challenge and it's one of the things I always get questioned on. So we've helped as well a few different authorities over the last few months on creating their pricing spreadsheets for when they go out to tender. Or even when they're looking at direct awarding. So I'm more than happy to look at that. So if you wanted to contact me directly, I can work with you to look at creating you a bespoke pricing spreadsheet. The key areas when recruiting, when carrying out the pricing evaluation, is the management fee and the agency fee. These are the areas that can be adjusted and managed by your MSP provider. So the areas that I would include, so the key thing is to also have an understanding of the job categories that you cover in your organisation. You should be able to get this off your current provider, and you should also be able to get the pay bands that you're currently working in, and it's key to have these broken down. It's then also relevant to have a breakdown of any statutory requirements for areas such as NI and working time regulations. As you'll see on the spreadsheet that's on the screen, working time regulation for evaluation purposes only, on average, is estimated by government to be 12.07%. So when evaluating, it's good to make sure that all providers evaluate against this. This is also relevant for NI, which is estimated at 13.8%. These are, when contracts though go live, these should be managed on real-time data and information for each worker. It's just to give you evaluating purposes so that you can evaluate everybody equally and fairly. Just to mention, within the statutory requirements, we've been working with several authorities to understand the current issues in the market in relation to the apprenticeship levy. And we have tried speaking to different authorities and the government in different areas to actually get a clear answer on this. And if I'm honest, it's still not 100% clear as to where the fees sit. At this moment in time, however, we do feel that at this moment in time, we feel that the apprenticeship levy is likely to be paid by the contracting authority because in several government documents, it's mentioned like a tax. We're still working with relevant government organisations, though, to have a definite conclusion on this, and we'll be more than happy to share this as soon as we have a conclusion. Our opinion is that the contracting authorities should be able to access the apprenticeship levy that they have paid into through the MSP, but unfortunately, at this time, it's not possible. I believe whether the cost is added up front, and I suppose this is the key bit for you guys to think about, is that these agencies and these MSPs are unlikely to be able to take on this full cost, and it could be detrimental in a sustainable contract. So whether the cost is actually added up front as a clear statutory 1% as an apprenticeship levy, or whether it's hidden, it's likely to be in there as a cost somewhere. It just depends how you want to talk about it and how open and honest you want to be about seeing that up front. But we will be key on giving as much updates as we can on where the apprenticeship levy fits. Another area is the pensions. So this can be amended by your organisation as a fixed rate, if you wish, or providers can amend this through their pricing matrix. The next area is the agency markup, which is the fee charged by either the supply and recruitment agency or the internal branch delivered by depending on the delivery model. So this is where the liquid sanctions in the social care market, for example, will have their markup of their agency fee. The management fee is then the MSP rate for the managing this service. So this is the likes of Matrix, Commensura, Reed, Adecco, and such like. This is where their fee then plays a part. This is the overarching fee. So this needs to be open to allow them to put that in there. There's then also the YPO rebate, which is 1/8 of a penny, which I know sounds ridiculous. However, it is now the lowest rebate currently available on any framework across the public sector. There is other areas that you can also look at including within your pricing matrix. I've included one here, which is about the pre-identified worker. This is where an organisation already knows where the worker they want in place is, and they know who they are and they want them within the organisation. So they advise the agency and it is managed through the MSP. So because there's not as much work involved in this, you may wish to include this as a lower fee rate. There's also the ability to have maybe an early payment discount rate. So if you can pay invoices earlier and quicker to the MSP within tighter time frames, such as 5 working days, they may be able to provide you lower rates. I thought the final thing then I would start to go on to is actually that you can procure all these services through the HRM Solutions framework by 2 routes. One, a direct award, so you can decide on a chosen provider to provide your choice and provide your solution by evaluating your organisation's need in line with the direct award pricing. We can provide this available to you if you get in contact with us. To select a provider, you will need to justify your choice based on the most economically advantageous provider for your organisation. If you'd like to discuss this in more detail, please feel free to get in contact. The other area that you can, and we are seeing that more organisations are doing this, is you may choose to carry out a further competition throughout the framework. And this is relevant when you're not 100% sure about the delivery model or service you require. It will allow you to understand the provider base in more detail, and you'll be sure to get the most appropriate provider for your organisation. It allows you that little bit more flexibility. And it also allows you to maybe get rates that are specific to you. It should also be noted that direct award is available for neutral vendor and master vendor models, and further competition is available for neutral vendor, master vendor, and hybrid models. This is because the hybrid model is bespoke for each organisation, so it wasn't felt that when creating this framework that the hybrid model could be done on direct award basis. And just so you know, we can support you through either a direct award or a further competition process as much or as little as you like. To complete the process, once you've done either of these, it's a matter of completing an order form, which we can send across, which is then signed by yourself and the successful provider. So that's the process and the framework, and that's giving you a little bit of background on where we believe the market is currently at. So what I thought I'd just briefly mention is how we can then help you through that process. So as I mentioned, we can help you as little or as much as you would like us to. We've helped organisations write their specifications, complete their tender documents, but for others, we've just sent them the relevant documentation and they've done it themselves. So it can be as much or as little as you like. We can review the feedback on your specifications, so we can review all the specification, give you feedback, look at the questions you're wanting to ask. We can attend one-to-one meetings, we can support you through supplier engagement days. So I'm doing those on Friday. It's Friday this week, we're supporting a local authority to do an engagement day with all the suppliers on the market to get an understanding of what they need. I can look at creating you your pricing documents to make it tailored for you. We've done pretty much all of them in the last few tenders that have gone out. So we spend a lot of time with a variety of organisations and are learning each time. I believe that in a public buying organisation we have the opportunity to share that learning by kind of being involved or not being involved as much as you want us to be. And I think that's one of the benefits we can have, is actually help you understand what other organisations out there are doing, depending on what you want. So as I hope that's kind of been helpful to understand where we can help and support you. I thought I'd briefly kind of give you a bit of background on where we're seeing that other authorities are going through the framework that we've currently got in place. So we currently have 42 customers live on the framework and are currently working with 13 contracting authorities to cover out further competitions. So as I mentioned, that's included some of me reviewing their specs, doing the engagement days. It just depends what you need our help with or don't need our help with. We're starting to see, in general, that a lot of authorities are starting to look at the hybrid solution because it is more bespoke. Particularly authorities with higher contract values would spend over about 10 million. We're seeing that they are definitely moving across. But it is key to also remember that different models will work for different organisations, and not all organisations will want the hybrid model. This is really dependent on the size of your organisation. But on a one-to-one basis, I am more than happy to discuss in detail what I believe is the right model for you. I just thought I'd then kind of give you a bit of feedback on what the suppliers are saying, because we were quite new in this market of approximately 3 years ago. So it's quite good to know that the market's also understanding what YPO is trying to achieve by supporting organisations. So we believe that the key to ensuring this framework is successful is by having the most innovative and appropriate supplier base. So I spend quite a lot of time with them, working with each of the suppliers to look at the current contracts we've got live to ensure they're working, but also to look at developments in the market. So at the minute, we're currently going through a process of having an engagement day with every supplier to see where we can take the next generation of temporary labour. As a public buying organisation, we have a unique, holistic view of the market from both the provider and authority's perspective. So I think we need to ensure that I can use that to help create better frameworks that benefit you guys. We have also had some really good feedback from the supply base with the work that we're doing on shaping this. It has been a challenge at times because we've started to make things think out of the box. So we've started to look at how can we look at different price mechanisms? How can we make these outcome-based specifications? How can the hybrid model work for different people? When is it right to have a neutral vendor and when is it right to have a master vendor? So we've really been asking those questions. And I suppose my background is I used to be a procurement category manager within a local authority. So I understand that finding those answers can sometimes be quite time consuming and we don't always have the time to do it. So I find it quite important that I can find you those answers, and within one conversation you can get everything you need around what's that supplier saying, what are the other authorities saying, and I could go for quite different few scenarios, but it is really more about me having bespoke conversations with you to understand what you're looking at. So I hope the last, well, I think I've ran over a little bit, so I do apologise. So I hope the last just over half an hour has been beneficial to you. As you've noticed, we've started to see a very big shift in the way temporary labour is specified and procured. Everything seems to be a little bit more thinking out that box. So what do you really want from that temporary labour contract? I find it quite an exciting market at the time. Maybe that's just me that's been a little bit sad, but I do think it's quite exciting at this minute in time. We're seeing that providers and public sector organisations are really starting to push the boundaries in achieving their outcomes. So as I've been going over the presentation, we've started to have a few questions come through. So I'll go, because I have run over a little bit, we might not have much time to go over as many as possible, but I will collate all of these as much as possible and send them out. So the first question asked by Katie is, if an organisation is procuring an outcome-based specification, could it be seen to be comparing apples and pears, for example? We've been asked this one, if I'm honest with you, quite a few times. And I think the original thoughts in the market was yes. But if I'm honest, my answer to that is, and we've worked a lot with suppliers to understand that, is it's about actually what you need. So focusing on their outcomes. And in reality, what you're asking for is a temporary labour managed service provider. And I think the market is in a place now where they understand what you guys want. So we're used to procuring these services in quite traditional models, but actually, in essence, it's about what you want as a temporary worker managed service. And the market is now competing in that. So we've had several different authorities. We've had Westminster Council, Hackney Council, we've had the AGMA authorities, the Manchester region. They've all procured in an outcome-driven way where they're wanting to ensure that their outcomes are met through this deliverable. And actually, it's quite exciting for the providers as well. And so I hope that's been helpful. I'm just going to have a quick look at some more further questions. So one question that's coming from Lorna is, I see your framework for contingent labour is due to end in December 18. When will a replacement contract be in place and will it be similar? So yes, the answer is 100% there will be a new framework in place. We are aiming for that contract actually to be live, because I did the documents yesterday, for September 18. I'm actually just in the process of writing all of that at the minute. So part of having these engagement days with the suppliers is actually pushing them to say, so how can campaigns for social workers, how can we develop the social worker market, look at the struggles we're having social workers, how can all of this be brought into an MSP's contract if an authority wants it to be? So I'm now having the conversation where I'm trying to push those boundaries a little bit more and say, what does an MSP mean in temporary labour? How can we make it so it's more bespoke and unique? So yes, it will have everything that it's currently got there available, but I'm hoping it's going to also be a lot more advanced. I don't believe that we need to be specific about models, but there will also be ability in there to be specific about models, because each and every one of yours organisations is quite unique and we need to be able to be flexible for that. So thank you. I hope that's answered that question. So thank you, Julie, for your question. And the question is your framework leaning more towards job categories per pay rates now? So yes, the answer is, in all honesty, our direct award pricing originally was around pay rates, but we're now starting to see a few different areas where we think that we need to make sure that job categories are in place. And I can provide you, when we send the questions answer back, with a bit more detail in relation to that as well. So it won't be 1 second, I'm just pulling through another question. So Claire has asked, do you have an example of surveys for use to send across to hiring managers? Yes, is the answer. So we have several different hiring manager surveys that I can send straight across. So I can include that in the question and answer pack that I send across. And you can all feel free to use it and amend it as much or as little as you like. And we've now completed the 45 minutes, and so I don't want to hold on anymore, but we have got a few more questions. So what I will do is I will pull all of those together and send them across to you. So I hope today's been helpful, and I wanted to just thank you on behalf of YPO, and thank you for joining me today. It is my first webinar, so I was a little bit nervous, I'm not going to lie. So thank you very much for listening in. And if you've got any other questions, feel free to contact me, and have a fantastic day. Thanks a lot.